tell some stories about a trip, of course, I took down the Mississippi River 2 summers ago. But I noticed that this picture's up there, so I wanted to explain that that's real close to where I started the trip. That's the little tiny Leaf River that comes out of East Leaf Lake, Minnesota, flows into the Crow Wing, and then over to the Mississippi. And I would have to go through those culverts. Now, Leaf River is very small, so I knew I wasn't going to canoe that with a partner. I did the Leaf River, which is only about 57 miles long. I did
where are you here? Are you way up in northern Minnesota?
I'm in west central Minnesota by Fergus Falls area in Otter Tail County. Okay. This river flows to the Mississippi, and if you go to the other end of the lake and you walk a ways, then that water flows to Hudson Bay. And so I'll talk about how I did both of those trips. But just before I really get started, since this was up there, I was going to tell you that in those culverts that I would kayak through, and I'd lay back just as far as I could squeak through there, at times there'd be swallows in there, nesting swallows flying around, which is really cool. But did you know that even though they're all swallows, the real big ones are gulps? And wait for it. And their babies are sips. You guys are good. Now, I'm going to introduce first Joe and Dave Fravel. Joe is a pretty one. Dave's the guy next to her. And some of you from the Sioux City area may know those people because Dave has been, well, Joe's been an educator here too for how many, 40 years or whatever. 42. And Dave's been in education, administration, and coaching in the Sioux City school, different schools for his productive lifetime. And they're really great people. And Dave has been on many adventures with me, including he did 2 full weeks and 1,400 miles of this trip. So there'll be times, as I'm talking about things, I'll say, hey, and by the way, this guy was with me, that kind of stuff. Plus, and you did a really good job so far, they've been told to laugh when I'm saying something that might be humorous, because we've been told that laughter is infectious. So when I say something that might be funny, they're going to start it, and feel free to join in. This trip that we took in 2021, just because I thought it was a cool name, I named it One4Water. Okay. And as I mentioned, Dave's part of it. He went from Caruthersville, Missouri, all the way down to Vicksburg, Mississippi, almost 400 and some miles with me, probably over 400. He even got to canoe part of the Yazoo River upstream, which was very arduous. But anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is because once he got there, he needed to get back from Vicksburg back to Sioux City to start teaching again, because this was now starting to get to the 1st of August. So lovely Joe there and my wife Ann took off from this area and drove to Vicksburg, Mississippi to bring him back here. Now our trip down the river was called One4Water. Their road trip was called 2-for-Wine. I'm not sure how many days it should take you to get to Vicksburg, but they took their time. You know, if you're on a 1,950-mile canoe trip, most people would think, boy, that's an adventure. It's hour to hour, day to day, something exciting is going on all the time. Well, you'd think that's true, but it's not always true, especially once you get down to the part of the Mississippi where it's maybe 2 miles wide, and that bend in the river you're looking forward to is an hour and a half away. I don't want to use the word boring, but at times things get to be redundant. You're doing the same stuff over and over again. And this thing you're sitting on is aching, your shoulders are tired, it's real hot. So there's some discomfort. And so my go-to thing for most of my life, whenever I'm feeling like I need to pep me up or at least forget about what's going on, is I start singing. I just sing. And my friends, the great people that went on this trip with me, knew that ahead of time. They knew they're going to have to put up with it. There are a couple problems. One, I don't sing very well. And secondly, I don't remember all the words. See, I can start off with John Denver, and pretty soon it morphs into Harry Chapin, and the next thing I'm doing Blackwater by the Doobie Brothers, and heaven help us if it turns into Here I Go Again on My Own by Whitesnake. But I'm just singing along. Well, towards the end of the trip, we're now in the Chaffalaya River, going to the Chaffalaya Swamp, and I have a great friend named Jim in the front, and we're floating along, and I'm singing something, who cares what. All of a sudden, I notice Jim up front is going, and I'm thinking, that's weird, so I'm trying to diagnose. I'm thinking, that's very strange, even for Jim, that's very strange. And he's almost my age, so it could be a sudden onset of dementia, maybe heat stroke, maybe dehydration. And I'm looking at him and thinking, well, I don't know what he's doing, but I know this, he is not going to stop doing it. until I acknowledge that I know he's doing it, whatever it is. So I let him do this for a little bit. I go, hey Jimmy, what's going on up there? You know, how's it going, boy? And he goes, oh, Hank, I feel so sorry for him. I go, sorry for what, Jim? He says, it's the alligators. Their arms are so short that no matter how hard they try, they can't cover their ears, and they have to put up with the darn singing. True story. True story. So, you know, the 8 different people I had at different times during the trip were fabulous people, and I needed them for companionship, I needed them for speed on the river, and I needed them for safety, but they also kept me laughing, and that's very important. Now, of course, I didn't always just paddle around the canoe. I was born in 1952 and grew up on a little family farm about 37 miles northeast of here outside the town of Remsen. And back then, growing up in the 50s and 60s, we had almost no money, but we ate fabulously because on that farm we had oats and corn and soybeans. We also had hay fields. We had pasture because we were feeding cows, pigs, and chickens that we got to eat. And of course, Mom had 2 guards who put all that kind of stuff up. It was almost a subsistence type of lifestyle, but God, I loved it. I didn't realize at the time how fortunate we were to live at that time in that way. And we always had something to look forward to, and that is our one vacation that we would take the last week of the summer, the week before school started. And what we would do is Mom and Dad would pile everybody in the station wagon, and we would head up to some lake, some little cabin in Otter Tail County, Minnesota. Because when my grandfather had retired from farming right on that very same farm, he had moved up to Fergus Falls, Minnesota in the 1930s and had a house there and a little cabin on the lake. So my dad was somewhat familiar with that region. So all year long, we would look forward to going up to Minnesota, not just for the fishing then, although we caught largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, walleyes, northern pike, fish that we weren't getting in the Floyd River when we fished around Remsen and went to other sand pits or whatever. But there also was the lily pads, the cattails, the eagles. Well, there weren't many eagles then, but we had the great blue herons, we had pelicans, and of course my favorite, the loon. So it was like going to a whole different world. It was a utopia place that I absolutely fell in love with. And something happened one of those summers, I think I was about 10 years old, that changed my life really in the future, a long time ahead. Is we're sitting on a lake called Beers Lake, which is a very beautiful lake. In fact, it was so beautiful that years later, the state of Minnesota came in and made it the focal point of a huge area that they made Maplewood State Park. So now back in like let's say it was 62, Dad and I are rowing out in this old wooden boat on Beers Lake, and it's absolutely pristine, and today it is still almost that way because it's part of the state park, which is really cool. But we're out on that lake, and it's freaking pouring on us. I mean, it couldn't rain any harder. I'm using that old Folgers coffee can to just lift the water out as fast as I can. It's supposed to be in there because the seam's leaking the old wooden rowboat, but now it's the stuff's coming from down above, from up above. And Dad asked me a question. I think tried to take my mind off the discomfort again, or he didn't want to hear me sing, I don't know. But he goes, Henry, do you know where these water drops that you're throwing out of this boat will finally end up on the trip to the ocean? And I was about 10. Now, if you were like me when you're 10 years old, you knew it all. I knew everything. I figured, and with complete confidence, I said, Father, those raindrops are going to find their way into a little stream near here. Then they're going to get into Mississippi and go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, drop the mic, perfect. And he simply goes, no, this water goes north. That's exactly what this book says here. And I said, what? He says, this water goes north. Well, I had to look that up. I get back to school, and sure enough, where we were at, the water was going to the Otter Tail River. It'd flow west, bump into the Boise Sioux coming from the south, and the two of them form the Red River of the North, which is the border between Minnesota and North Dakota, and takes you up through that area, goes into Manitoba, goes through the beautiful city of Winnipeg, and then empties into Lake Winnipeg. From there, you got 300 and some miles to get to the north end of Lake Winnipeg. Then the Nelson River is the main outflow, but you can then get off the Nelson and go over on the Ishimamish and get into the watersheds of the Gods and the Hayes River, and it takes you to Hudson Bay of the North Atlantic Ocean, to a very historic place called York Factory, which was the first Hudson Bay Company outpost in North America, where all the pelts, most of the pelts from that whole region would end up back in Europe. Well, I'm only 10 or 12 years old at that time, but I was absolutely bitten with the fact that I'm going to do that trip. So for the next 17 years of my life, I always talk about it, think about it, never planned it, just talk about it, dream about it, think about it. Well, during that period of time, of course, I get out of high school, I go through college, I get married, but I'm always still talking about this trip, especially with my one of my younger brothers, Keith, and a friend of ours, both of these people, of course, from Remsen, and Rich Whitby. And in the summer of 1978, those two guys were living with me, and we were playing some slow pitch softball together, and then we were out to one of the favorite watering holes with, of course, my wife Ann, and we got to talking about this fabulous canoe trip that we've never done, but we will, of course, sometime. And she slams her beverage down and says, "That's it, guys." She says, "You've talked about this ever since I've met you, and you've never done anything about it." She goes, "Hank, we don't have any kids yet. Rich, you and Keith are getting out of college next spring. I want you to do this. Promise me you will start planning that trip and you will do it next summer, or you will never, ever do it. And don't ever blame me for it." So we've been given an ultimatum and permission. So immediately, I started planning it. And of course, there's no computers, there's no GPS, there's no cell phone, none of that stuff. I went over to the library in Iowa State, found some topographical maps and some other charts, and next May, myself, Rich, Keith, and a guy named Denny, we jumped in 2 canoes and left from a little place called East Leaf Lake, Minnesota, and paddled 1,300 to 1,400 miles north, as far as the water would take us, as far north as we could go. Ended up at York Factory, got to see a polar bear. I mean, an absolutely wonderful, epic journey. We had no sponsorship, we didn't talk to any newspapers, we had no companies making sure there was pressure on us to complete the thing. We had all told each other that if we didn't get along or we were starving, freezing, whatever, we'd just quit. But it was wonderful. But we did that whole trip because we were young. I was 27, I was the old guy. Keith and Rich were 22, and Denny was only 20, you know. And he was kind of a stranger to the rest of those guys, especially the way we knew him is he worked for me at the time at the restaurant that I was managing in Ames. Now, wait a minute, if I've already quit my job, can you say he still worked for me? Right, he probably wasn't working for me once I quit to do this. But so the 4 of us did that for the fun, for the adventure, for the challenge, and to see if we could do it. And we did, and it was marvelous. And we saw wondrous things. We caught so many big fish. We drank the water right out of the streams and the rivers. We were in absolute pristine wilderness in 1979 once you got north of Lake Winnipeg for 400 miles going to the bay. In fact, we called that trip, since there are 4 of us, we called it the Trek of the Halibut 4, because there were 4 of us, and it was just for the halibut. So that's why we did it. Okay. So that trip gets done in 1979. Life goes on. And, you know, Ann and I start having kids. Keith and Rich they do different things. I mean, years and years, decades and decades go on. Denny writes this wonderful book about our journey. This water goes north, just paying tribute to those words my dad told me that time that the rain was falling on our heads. And that's exactly why he took that phrase. Well, anyhow, so there's nothing going on crazy in my life as far as disappearing for a summer. Now, this young man, Dave, and I would go on adventures, maybe canoe the Missouri River, following Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery for a while, or we went way up north into northern Saskatchewan and got in some trouble on a river called the Waterfound. And, you know, we'd do other family adventures and things, but nothing unique or long. Okay, now go now to 2 years ago, right about now, because it was either January or February of 2020. By now, Ann and I have a little cabin, a nicer little cabin, up about 5 miles from East Leaf Lake, where that trip to Hudson Bay started. And I'm going to go up there ice fishing. And I'm driving along, I'm getting real close to the cabin, and I cross this little tiny Leaf River. And it's frozen, of course. I'm reminiscing, I'm thinking about that trip to Hudson Bay. And I'm crossing the river, and I think, you know, that little thing goes the other direction. Now, I'm not making this up, and I don't know how I can emphasize this more, but immediately I had, I guess it's called an epiphany if you're looking up in a dictionary, but I had out of the clear blue sky a bolt of lightning. I had cherubs flying above singing Air Supply and Journey songs. Unicorns were dancing in the ditches, and I had goosebumps like this, and it was just a moment of absolute clarity. I mean, it happened just like that. And as special as it was, it could be described or explained in 6 words, why not go the other direction? I mean, it just hit me, I'm gonna go the other direction. I'm gonna start at that same boat ramp where we went as far as that water went north, and I'm gonna go as far as it goes south. And then immediately, within a quarter mile, I knew I was gonna do it. I was gonna do it, but I also knew it wasn't just gonna be for fun, adventure, the challenge. I needed it to stand for something. I needed this time. Because now I'm not 27. You know, I'm getting about 69 then. I'm 70 now. And so if I'm going to spend the summer doing something like that, I had to make it count. Because you see, I owe Mother Earth, or Mother Nature, or planet, whatever entity you want to call it, I owe a debt to it. I've had so many days, so many places, it's wonderful places that I've been in this beautiful areas and that. And yet, I don't think I've always, I'm like the one star, but I haven't always been the Lorax. So I think I need to pay back. So I came up with this idea and started making phone calls. And a friend called a friend, a friend called a friend. Next thing you know, within 2 days or so, I have partnered with the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium in Dubuque, Iowa. Show of hands, who's been there? Wonderful, wonderful place. I hadn't been there until then, but I got to talking to them, and they have a program called Take Care, which is conservation action through advocacy, research, and engagement. And with that, they impact about 1,500 youth in the summer, mostly in the summer, and all the way through like middle school to college age. So that's exactly the type of programs I wanted to try to help. Now, how am I going to try to help them? That's where it gets like, I don't know. But I've heard of fundraising things, like, you just ask people for donations and they send money. It's a miracle, isn't it? So the River Museum put together a web page explaining this trip that like I said, it was called One4Water. And through their help, and my lovely daughter Robin and my wife Ann, we put together a fundraising page or post, whatever you want to call it, on Facebook. And that Facebook fundraising entity is where almost all of those donations came in through as the summer went on. And pretty soon we had over $20,000, and then we had over 30, and now it's been over $45,000. Now, that's not going to change the world, but we didn't have any idea when we started. I think myself and the museum would have been very happy if we'd have got 20 grand for their programs, and I'm very pleased that it went more than double that. And I'll get into this book later, but every book sold, more money goes back to them too. So, but anyhow, so now we've put together an idea of a trip. We've got a way to spend donated money that will help now and for the future. So really, we needed to plan it, needed to get it going. So I needed some things. Well, I needed a canoe. I had one of those, and I decided right away.
I said just one.
So I have this canoe. I decided right away that the trip is self-funded. All donations that would come in would go to the museum. So any expenses that I had, and I tried not to have my friends have expenses, but for travel, for food, anything like that was coming out of our pocket. So in other words, as far as buying equipment, if I had it, it went. I wasn't going buying new stuff. Getting back to something Dave said, the canoe that went all the way down from this area down to the Gulf of Mexico has a name. It's a 17-foot aluminum canoe. It's made by an Osage company. It's nothing special, but it was perfect for us. It didn't leak. It was stable. It was sturdy. And I owned it already. I bought it used. Now the first canoe that I had, I also bought, I had to buy everything used. I bought a canoe in 1976, just after we got married. First one I'd ever had in my life. And it went all the way to Hudson Bay. Now, unfortunately, I still have that canoe, but it seems heavier now. I don't know why. It seems so heavy, and it leaks a little. But it had a name. When I bought it, like I said, in 1976, it had just been in a bicentennial parade. And it was all painted up with stars and stripes and had a word on the bottom, simply said Lucky. So Lucky was the canoe that went north to Hudson Bay. And years later, Dave and I got some festive trips with a canoe that I named Lucky 2, T-O-O. So now we have Lucky and Lucky 2. We've wrecked that canoe. So the one that went south was Fortunate 1. So that's canoe 1. So we're getting things together now. We've got the canoe, we've got this, that. I bought a solar panel. I bought a little marine radio so I could talk to the lock master and tell him, hey, we're coming in, what's the status, so we can lock through, or talk to the barges, this question. Bought a solar panel that unfortunately we didn't use very often because I was trying to figure out where I could keep it dry and not slide into the river. We needed to keep our phones charged, to do the Facebook and stuff like that. But we found out that it was a lot easier to have those little phone charging packs, like 5 or 6 of those, and then for a week or so we'd have our phones charged perfectly. So, we're getting things kind of put together. We got the maps. Had to get a lot of maps. I put some out there so you can look at. The first ones we used are from the Minnesota DNR called Water Trails maps, and they're great on the upper Mississippi because they show you actually where some water access campsites are. And then once you get past Minneapolis, you have to get into the Army Corps of Engineers navigational charts for their barges and their commercial traffic, which shows you mile markers and beacons, things like that, but doesn't show you places to camp. And those things are cumbersome. The first one has, I don't know, like 65 charts, weighs over 5 pounds. And the next one is the same. And then, because I decided to go in the Chaphalaya, then we had to have those maps and charts for that. Excuse me. So, we got most of the provisions ready to go. We got the maps, we're ready, except the most important thing, I needed partners. I need to have somebody in front of the canoe. And so the first people I asked, of course, were Keith, Rich, and Denny that went on that trip 70 and 79, 3 years earlier. But that wasn't gonna happen. You know, at the ages that we were all at, they weren't gonna commit to something like that. But it meant a whole lot to me that all three of them were there the day that we paddled away, or I paddled away the kayak and it started. So I asked my kids. My son could commit, but only to 3 or 4 days, and that was right before the 4th of July. Both of my daughters said they'd like to, but they couldn't because of work. So I asked a couple nephews, same thing, like to, can't do it. So now I just get on my phone and start scrolling down, looking for friends. Now I am very blessed. I'm very blessed for a lot of things, but I'm very blessed to have a whole lot of really good friends. Because can you imagine just asking a complete stranger, yeah, hey, what are you doing this summer? Want to jump in a canoe and float along for a couple months, you know? See the sights and sunburns and that? But anyway, I was able to come up with, of the family and friends, 7 wonderful people. And I said there were 8 because the 8th one was Jared McGovern joined for 3 days, and he's the curator of those programs that the money went to at the River Museum. So it was very special when we got to Dubuque for the next 3 days. The gentleman that's in charge of those programs was actually paddling along part of the trip. So now I had 8 wonderful people that were designated to be part of this trip. And of course, they had committed to a time slot. I would never know for sure until just 3 or 4 days ahead of time where we would be at that time slot. But I needed every day taken care of, not the miles as much as the days. So like Dave knew he was going to join me at this date. And then once it got about 5 days away, I said, hey, it looks like we'll be in Carruthersville, Missouri. You know, and then he knew that on this date, on the 18th of July, I think it was. No, I'm sorry, it was later than that. Doesn't matter, but on a certain date now, he's gonna be done, he has to get back here. So that's when we tell the next guy, Jim, hey, you need to get to Vicksburg, because that's when Dave's gonna be done. So that's how that worked. The partners committed to days, not to distance or to locations. But it all worked out fine. So we've got the crew together, we've got supplies and everything. I kayak for the first 2 days, then my friend Don Smalley jumps in, he goes all the way to Dubuque, then Jared, and it just keeps going from there on. We have the upper Mississippi it's called the upper Mississippi from where it starts down to Cairo or Cairo, you can pronounce it either way, basically south of St. Louis where the Ohio River joins in. And then from then on, it's the lower Mississippi, and that goes to the Gulf. As that summer went on and as the river changed, and I'll take questions later when then I'm actually talking about things you're interested in, but when I'm answering your questions, then I can go into a little more details of some of that stuff. But the river went from clear and narrow to, of course, to extremely wide and full of sediment. There was obviously some trash and litter in it that we had to deal with. But the thing that I didn't know ahead of time is that it got faster. We tried to, as I planned this whole trip, the last companion gym needed to be done by the first week in August. And so I come up with this idea, and from taking that trip north, I knew that we could average, if we worked hard, average 3 miles an hour. And so if we went 10 hours a day, we'd go 30 miles. And if we went 30 miles, we'd get there by like the 7th of August. So every day we were trying to go 30 miles an hour. And that was factoring a fudge factor of about once a week where we didn't go at all in case we had a bad storm or something like that, which only occurred a couple of times. But so we thought we could get there to that amount of time. Well, as we got further south, the river got a lot wider, and the weather got so hot and humid. It was really tough to be out there for that many hours. But now the river's going so fast, we didn't have to be. There were days like when Dave was with me that he had this thing on his watch. You could see how fast we're going. We were past Helena, Arkansas, and he looks down and goes, "Hank, we're going 7 miles an hour." I mean, and it's not that we were paddling that hard. The current itself was just flowing really good. Now, right now they're dealing with kind of a really bad low water situation in Mississippi. But when we were flowing in the the summer of 2021, it was really high in places. In fact, we would look at the USGS gauges to see what the situation was as far as water levels, and it looked like a wave where 4 days behind us it was low water, and then there's this big wave where it almost is a flood stage, and then 4 days ahead they predict it's going to be low water again. Well, we were riding that wave. We were up on really high water, going really fast. Now we had debris, trees, branches, and stuff in the water that we had to deal with, but we kind of scooted right along. So we decided then, like I said, we didn't take the Mississippi all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. We did not go through Baton Rouge. We did not go through New Orleans. The reasons being, two main reasons, was as I went along and I learned more and more about that stretch, and we'd already been dealing with the barge traffic and that, I found that that's a very dangerous stretch of the river. Because once you get past Baton Rouge, you not only have all the barges, but you have ocean tankers and container ships. And they have, of course, a very nice wide channel that you're trying to share that with them. But if you got 2 tanker ships coming here and a barge going this way, there's very little room for this tiny little vessel to escape them and their wake. And then the problem is, unfortunately, is from Baton Rouge on, you don't have really an escape route because on both banks there are parked out ships. They are all parked out, either loading or offloading, unloading, whatever. And there's terminal after terminal. So you can't just say, hey, I need to get to the sand, I need to get to the trees, I've got to get to safety. There's no place to go. You're trapped. And so we didn't want to do that. There have been some tragedies in the past in that region. We thought, why go all the way down there and then have a big problem? So we looked into also, it's because of the beauty and the scenery in that. Once you get down to where the Chapelai Swamp forms off to your right or to your west, there are 3 huge gates there, which Dave and I termed the gates of doom, because there's these large signs that say, if we open these gates and you're near here, you're gone, sorry. So don't be near them, be on the other side of the river. But that's where the Corps lets about 30% of the Mississippi's flow go the other direction through that marvelous swamp, 2.5 million acres of swampland, and heading towards the sea, the Chapelai Swamp, where like that TV show Swamp People are. So we got to see alligators, we got to see a whole lot of cool birds that you don't see around Sioux City or Remsen. And it was just a neat experience for people from Iowa to go through a swamp like that. It was marvelous. Plus, it's very pretty. It's really safer. And the Chapelai Swamp is a marvelous, marvelous sponge. So this water's coming out of the Mississippi, and it starts going through the swamp, and a couple weeks later it gets to the ocean, and by then it's cleaner. So it actually gets cleaner as it goes along because it's going slowly through this spongy swamp here, which is kind of cool. Okay, so now the trip's done. I got my brother Keith lined up. He comes all the way down to Morgan City, Louisiana. He loads Fortunate One. Myself, my friend Jim was in there at the time, and we drive all the way back up here. Trip's over. I give a few talks here and there. Donations are still coming in. It's cool. I'm pretty proud of it. Everything's fine. And then somebody says, write a book. And I'm going, I don't know. Write a book. That's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. It's going to take a long time. And my wife said, no, you got to write a book. That wasn't enough initiative. But what occurred was that all of these donations were coming in from people. By the time we got close to the end, we had over 1,500 people that were following what we're doing every day. And I really look forward to, and Dave can attest to this, we would actually paddle farther sometimes just to make sure that we had cell service so I could make that Facebook post. Because so many people were telling us this is part of their daily routine. They were like vicariously in that canoe with us. They wanted to know where we were, what we'd seen, what the weather was like, who we met. Every evening they wanted to know what that day was like, and they were looking forward to it. So that meant a lot to me. So I would put those posts up just so that once I hit send, boom, all these comments come in. You know, gives me something to do in the evening. Questions, concerns from people. I don't know who they are. I only have 1,500 friends, for God's sakes. So they're from all over and very interested and very concerned and very good people because they donated to it. And they're the ones that said, we love following this. Would you please write a book? And there were so many of them that said that. I finally talked to Ann. I said, maybe I will write a book. And then I thought this, is, I don't know, people have known me for a long time. I'm the guy I always want the easy way out. And I'm thinking, this can't be that hard. Because, see, I kept a little journal the whole time. And, of course, I had all those Facebook posts. And I had all these hundreds of pictures. I had for resource, all I gotta do is say, day 1, write down what the journal said, write down what the Facebook post said, day 2, do it again, day 3, do it again. Skip, you got a book. And Ann goes, you don't want to do that, and don't do that. If you're going to take the time to write a book, Hank, make it something that's worthwhile and proud of. Don't just say, we paddle, we paddle, we paddle. There's something on the sandbar, we paddle, we paddle, we paddle some more. Weights and rocks, something on the sandbar, we paddle some more. So, with that idea, it gave me kind of a free rein. Because, see, I enjoy writing. I have never had a book published before, but I have had a couple stories that the Iowa DNR were nice enough to put in their Iowa Outdoors magazine. Some really, I think, really cool stories I'm proud of that have to do with some of their family, my family, sentimental and family traditions down rivers in Iowa. And another story about decades of fishing in an old ice shack that I made out of a scrap heap of lumber. And I've written some poems that I'm proud of, but nobody gets to see them. So I wasn't afraid of the writing as much as then I wanted to do it well. And once Ann said do it so that you're proud of it, I came up with the thought process of not just we paddle, we slept, we paddle. But first of all, of course, I got to start with growing up in Remsen, what my life was like back then, those vacations to Minnesota that made me so wonderfully in awe and longing for places that are wild, places that are outdoors, places that are wilderness. And then I just needed to add to it, kind of weaving a tapestry of a history of my being a little kid, other trips that I've been on with other people, what we did see and do that day. But then also I thought, why not just get out of the canoe for a while? It's my book, I put in what I want, right? So I have 8 different segments up there that are things like birds, trees, fishing, hope, wilderness and wonder, water, music. And then one I put in there called Dealing with the Seas, the letter C. By the way, here we haven't laughed for a while. What's a pirate's favorite letter of the alphabet? R. Most people would think that, but they have an undying love for the sea. Anyway, so I'm planning this in 2020, and I'm doing it in 2021, and so we are all dealing with COVID, and I'm dealing with cancer. So it's a whole segment about dealing with the seas that's in there too. And I really think that those things are important because it kind of gives the reader the whole background of why I would have done a trip like this, the reasons, and how I hope that through the trip, the book, and the donations that are going to make kind of a difference. I'm going to talk about a couple things about that, and then if you don't mind, I'm actually going to read a couple things in the book. Well, in fact, I'm going to read a couple things in the book right now. Is that okay? Doesn't take long. One of them was a day that Dave was with me. I don't know if I mentioned him in there that day, but okay, this is just a little paragraph that happened one night on day 50th day of the trip, so we're getting close again. Watching the huge diesel-powered vessel go by, my mind wandered, and I started thinking of the river's past and future. When canoes and keel boats were making their way between its shores, what was the Mississippi like? Was it as wide as it is now? How clear was the water back then? What wildlife and in what numbers drank from it? What will the river and its banks look like a few hundred years from now? I sure hope that in, let's say, 2221, future inhabitants with a bit of wanderlust will be able to enjoy the water, the sandbars, and the trees as we have. A cool thing then popped into my mind as I thought about that, and I thought that perhaps if the species was right in its location fortunate, one of those little seedlings that I was setting my tent up by could be a wonderful massive tree 150 years from now. And with that thought in my mind, I turned to the little small ones and said, good luck, buddy. We're all pulling for you. Now, since this is a Sierra Club, I'm going to read my segment. It has nothing to do with floating down the river, but I'm going to read my segment on trees. And this is a true story, and it was very impactful. I'll start with a quote by Richard Powers from the book Dover Stories. I'm familiar with that. You and the tree, wait a minute, let's do this better. I don't want light here. You and the tree in your backyard come from a common ancestry. 1.5 billion years ago, the two of you parted ways. But even now, after an immense journey in separate directions, that tree and you still share 1/4 of your genes. That's why trees are pretty special to us. Now this goes into this little story from north of Remsen, Iowa one day. I don't know how old I was, but I do recall the carnage and I remember the sadness. My father wasn't born in a hospital. He came into the world in 1917 in the same farmhouse bedroom where he and my mom spent the nights of over 45 years together. Dad was the last of the litter and was many years younger than his siblings, who had all moved off the farm when he was still a little boy. I don't know if he would say that he was lonely as a child, but he certainly was alone. His solace, his playground, was a huge grove north of the house that provided protection from the blizzard's fury, and the row of mature trees that formed a barrier between the dusty gravel road and the farmstead. And he would tell me of his safaris in the woods when he was young, hunting squirrels and rabbits, and he showed me the trees that he used to climb. Now fast forward to me at the age of 6 or 7, and I'm sitting on one of Dad's soiled pant legs in the farm's south driveway. He had gone to the meetings, he had written letters and pleaded his case, but to no avail. Plymouth County had decided that the road going past our property was to be widened, improvements were to be made, and all of the trees within a certain distance of the new center line were doomed. Dad had even offered to give them some land on the east side where there were no trees. They would just slide the road that direction for a half mile or so, but no opinions or decisions were changed. So when the day of the massacre came, Dad took a chair from the kitchen, placed it in the center of the south driveway, and asked me to sit with him. A hard-working farmer took the afternoon off to watch an event he couldn't stop, but now felt compelled to watch. The destruction crew had brought in a large bulldozer to topple the trees, along with chainsaws to cut the victims into lengths that could be hauled away easily. The noise of the machines and the smell of the moist sawdust and crushed leaves were inescapable. Most of the trees in the line were box elders, whose red-streaked wood made them appear to be bleeding when cut. And those were dispatched without incident by the dozer and saws. But there was one tree that was different. Near the south end, where we had our horseshoe court, stood a taller, thicker specimen. As Dad watched the workers with a shame-on-you look on his face, he turned to me and he said, "Henry, that big one at the end is an ash. It is older than twice our ages put together, and its wood is so strong they make baseball bats out of it. I don't think they have the equipment here to take it down." When they got to the ash, the bulldozer leaned and pushed against it with no effect except to scrape off some bark. Then the machine backed up to get a run at it, only to stall out when it hit the tree that would not budge. With tears in his eyes, Dad stood up and applauded. Later we walked back to the home. He had the chair in one hand and my hand in his other. He said, "Well, son, for at least another day we have one standing tall." I relate that story because that was probably where my love affair with trees got its start. I get pleasure and even comfort from looking at them, touching them, and caring for them. My favorite is what I refer to as the giant of the prairie, the cottonwood. I cannot explain my mostly irrational feelings I have for trees, but my life has certainly been better because of them. So that's stepping out of the canoe and going through a whole different segment. Another segment I'd like to talk about is music. I hope you people, whether you can sing like me or not, I hope you like music, I hope you like songs. Music has been very important to me, and this book is extremely unique in the fact that whether you are finished with a day of the journey or a segment where I talk about something else, there will be a line there, and what it says is a suggested song that I think you should listen to. There's one for every segment, for every day. Now these songs are either very familiar ones to me that I like, they're just favorites of mine, or they have special family meanings to me, or they're just really good songs, or the talk about what the lyrics are would mesh with what we did that day. But anyhow, there's a song for every day or every segment, except a couple days, especially one day that I thought was more important that it needed more than one song. Dave was with me at the time when we spent a day in Memphis with some really nice people that put us up for the night. And Memphis is known for blues, barbecue, Elvis, but unfortunately an assassination. prior to this trip, and of course long before I knew I was going to do this trip, I read a book by Hampton Science called Hellhound on His Trail about what happened before and after Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination down there. And we went to the Civil Rights Museum there at the Lorraine Hotel. And we stood right there looking at the balcony where Dr. King was shot. And the building over there where the bullet came from. And I mean, to me, it was very powerful. It's as if I wanted to go back in time and stop it. I wanted to warn him, or I wanted to do something, but I kept thinking of that flight of that bullet that I could not stop. So that day, when I put down a couple songs that I'd like you to listen to, one of them, of course, was Dion's song, Abraham, Martin, and John. Probably fairly familiar with that. Well, years later, Dion wrote another song that you may not be familiar with called Song for Sam Cooke in America. See, back in the doo-wop days, Dion and the Belmonts, and then Dion by himself, would travel all over the country with other artists singing their songs and that, and most of the time, the headliner, the big guy on it was Sam Cooke, because he had the more popular songs out on the top 40. So they'd all be singing and performing on the stage, but then when they go out to eat or go to the hotel, Mr. Cooke couldn't go with them, because he looked different than them. So I suggested those two songs for that day, but also another one, if you're familiar with the song, They Have to Be Carefully Taught. It appears in the musical South Pacific. And it simply says that children will not hate. They will not discriminate. They will not be prejudiced until you teach them. So they have to be carefully taught. They have to be taught to hate. You know, by the time they're 7 or 8, they have to be carefully taught. And I thought those would probably be pretty important songs for that day. Let me talk real quick here about hope, which I have a segment on hope in there. And years ago, I also read a book from Barry Lopez called Arctic Dreams, a marvelous writer, mostly about Inuit traditions and that, way up north. But he also is a very smart person, so much smarter than me, and he's always trying to figure out how people could help or how we could help or what is our future like. And somebody asked him one day, he says, Mr. Lopez, what do you think the future of our planet and that is like? And he says, well, it's very easy to believe we're headed for extinction. Because we live on a planet with very impersonal chemical, physical, and biological laws. In other words, we're done. But he said, you know what? A more engaging view, and one that we must take, is that I believe that as a civilization we will find the knowledge to identify the problems. We will find the composure to not be intimidated by their complexities, and we must find the courage to take those steps even if they bear no fruit in our lifetime. That's sincerely my hope, that a little thing like One4Water or a group like the Sierra Club are taking those steps. No matter how old you get, remember this: don't give up and say what difference does it make. Ask yourself how you can make a difference. Thank you. And now, like I said, I would love to have Dave answer all of your questions. I hope you have some. Ask questions about barges, about flying fish, about locks, things like that. I don't know what time, how much time do you have? What's going on? Are you still scrolling through all these?
Yeah,
Just started.
That's okay. Hey, I apologize. I meant to thank him for doing this, and I was going to tell you that these pictures up here kind of are in chronological order, but I don't speak about every one of them or anything, so they're simply a background while I was talking. And then what I wanted you to do is go, wow, that's weird, or that's interesting. I'll make sure I ask him a question about that. So you keep scrolling through all of these while I'm answering questions, and then if somebody says, stop, you got a cool question about a picture, please do. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Tell us about the flying fish.
Well, we ran into what's called a species called a silver Asian carp. I'd only seen videos of them, I'd heard about them, but I hadn't seen one yet. And the first day we ran into him, my son Andy was with me. We were just north of Quincy, Illinois. We're going along, and it got to be a curiosity at first, because I thought, geez, that's cool. These great big fish are just jumping out of the water all around it, 5, 6, 7 at a time. And you know, that curiosity and that geez, that cool feeling lasted about 15 minutes and became pure hatred and fear and disgust and they were terrible, absolutely terrible. They would fly out, they would hit you, they'd land you in your canoe and move crap all over everywhere. They'd bounce off you. They didn't know where they were going, of course. And we had to put up with them for the whole rest of the stretch of the Mississippi. But we did find some things out about them, and that is, if we could stay in the channel where the fast water was, they weren't there. They wanted to be over in the quiet stuff. So, depending on the width of the channel, the width of the river then, between the red, we call them barrels, the red barrels, the green barrels, we're floating along. We wanted to be in that channel, so we could go faster, and we weren't by the flying cart. But if we get squeezed by a barge or two, towards the end, we had no problem having one barge and us going by, but if you get one coming and one going, then a lot of times you gotta get out of the channel. As soon as we got in the quiet water, it's like a jack-in-the-box thing. You know the son of a gun's gonna happen, and it's gonna scare you, but don't know when. And so that was happening with the silver carp, and we absolutely hated them. There will be a picture coming up of one flopping around in the canoe. Okay, can we stop? Let's go back to that one. That is obviously a pelican. There's Kale to the right. He was my partner at the time, and our friend Dustin decided to kayak with us one day. This is up above Clinton, and we looked over, and there was a pelican there that was all tangled up in something. Thought it was fishing line. So Kale said, you know, this would be good karma. Let's run over and help that pelican. And we couldn't have got it if it was just the two of us in the canoe, because even though he couldn't fly, he could swim like everything. But the guy in the kayak, we helped corral it. And pretty soon we got him closer over to that area by the lily pads and the sand, and I yelled to Kale, go get him, High Pockets. And that youngster jumped out and ran down the pelican, and he actually had a little wire on him. They snipped all the wire off. So we let him go, and hopefully he's doing fine. Now, you can keep going through pictures now, but I want to add something. Now, when Kale said this will give us good karma, he said hopefully we put a deposit into the bank of good karma. Well, within 3 or 4 hours, we were making quite a withdrawal. On that day, which was my worst day of the trip, we had made the decision to go through the lock at Clinton and camp below it, because then the next morning we wouldn't have to wait in case your barge traffic would be able to get going right away. Now we could see the facility a couple miles away down the river, and the winds were calm and the sun is going down. There's nothing should go wrong. But as we kept going and getting closer, out of the blue, like it shouldn't have happened, a gale started blowing from the north-northwest. It's actually pushing us that direction. So it is a tailwind, but it seriously got up like 30 miles an hour. And now we are in big water with big waves and big winds, and we are where we should not be. And so we needed to get to the lock chamber. We couldn't go to the right because you can see that's the rollers of the dam, or what we call CD, that's certain depth. So we weren't going to go that way. So we needed to get to the lock chamber where the waters be quiet and we'd be safe. Now, we were already taking on some water, and being in the stern of the canoe, I'm constantly keeping us straight. I couldn't take my hands off the paddle to reach down below, open this watertight tote, and get my little radio out, which was the one that I would talk to the lock master and say, you got a southbound canoe. I don't know why I said southbound, nobody's going upstream. Anyhow, we got a southbound canoe approaching your facility, what is the status, etc., which we do it all. I never took the time to do it. But I kept yelling at Kale, we're going to be safe, okay, we're going to be fine, we just got to get around this concrete thing, we'll be inside the lock. We turn the corner, and there's a barge heading at us. Now we got CD of a whole different thought process right there. So now we have to turn the canoe into the waves. Now we don't have far to go, but it slams us over into the concrete wall, and we got about 70 yards to try to get to what I call the appliance rock. That's our safe haven. What are the appliance rocks? Well, they're riprap, basically those big old chunks of limestone. Most of them are about the size of a microwave, but some are as big as a dorm room refrigerator, and the little ones are like toasters. So I said, we got to get to the appliance rocks. And we did. We made it, threw everything up on the banks. It looked like a debris field from a plane crash, and the whole evening ended up okay. But yeah, that's where we made a withdrawal then from that bank of good karma. So that was the worst day of the trip for me. I still feel bad that we got in that situation, but we got through it. Now, sometimes people ask me, what was your favorite day of the trip? And by golly, it's real easy. We're going along there with Don, my first partner with me. He lives in Marquette, Iowa, and we're hoping we could get to Marquette to leave him off, and the next partner was going to be there. Heck, we were able to make it all the way to Dubuque, where the River Museum is and where Jared's gonna start canoeing with me. So the museum said, hey, we're gonna put together a gathering. You show up and talk about the trip so far, and we'll get more people to have a couple drinks, maybe put some money in the kitty, something like that. So we've got that set for the 18th of June, 2021. And my wife Ann and my daughter Robin, we're gonna drive up from Central Iowa to meet me there and get to see them. As we're approaching there, I get on the phone, the radio, and I go, hey, Lockmaster, this canoe coming into the facility, what's the status? He comes back, he says, it's all open, we'll open the gates, come in, we'll let the water out, away you go. So great, thank you, we'll be in a couple minutes. Then radio crackles, he comes back and says, hey, it looks like you got some friends here. So awesome. Well, we're coming up to the gates open, and there's a wooden deck up above that people could walk out on to look at like the eagles and the barges and stuff. And honestly, God, my wife Ann was there, my daughter Robin was there, my daughter Carrie had flown in from Denver. Andy, my son, had driven up from Des Moines with my granddaughters. They all have placards and banners, and the granddaughters are going, we're so proud of you, Papa. Way to go, Dad. I'll never, ever forget it. Because as you go through your life, you get so excited about things that your kids do, even if they're normal things, but your kid did it, so it made you so proud. It was so special to know that my kids were proud of me. That was really, really neat. So that was my favorite part of the trip. Okay, other questions? Yes, sir.
Did anyone get sick, injured, or
Yeah, I got sick.
dehydrated?
No, the only one was me. I got sick. We had just left Muscatine, and that night we were planning to get down to Burlington, and by the time we got to a little place called Keithsburg, Illinois, I was toast. As the day wore on, I wore out, and we've never come up with the exact reason for it, but I couldn't keep anything in my body. I didn't have any balance. I mean, like, if I needed to go to the bathroom, even if I'm on my knees, I'd fall over. And I lost track of time. I was delirious. I was a mess. And we set up our tents at a campground there, right on the river. Really nice lady named Rachel, only charged us $20, and then she gave the money back when she found out what we're doing. And Cale, who was with me at the time, is also an EMT and a fireman down in Ames, so he's trained for that. And he asked me the next morning, says, how you doing? Are you alive? I said, no. And it's raining, we're camped in the sand, and everything's wet. He says, Henry, you're not gonna get better in these conditions. I'm calling Andy. So he called my son, and fortunately this happened to Keithsburg, Illinois, instead of down at Memphis or Vicksburg or something. Because Andy was able to get there within 5 hours and take us all the way back. We left the canoe there with Rachel and came back, and I spent 3 days then at home. My wife Ann, at that summer, had been a nurse for 47 years, my daughter Robin for another 5, so I had 50 years of RNs and 2 little granddaughters trying to help me feel better at home, including they gave me an IV down in the morning stuff. So yeah, good question. The only one that got sick was me.
So how did you start getting back on the trail with them?
I'm sorry, what did you say, Jeannie?
How did you,
Get back on the trail then?
yeah,
Okay, well, once again, very fortuitous, the next partner, the next paddling companion I had after Cale was gonna leave was Andy. And so once I got better, Andy and I and my wife then, so she could take the vehicles back, they drove back down, and we got the canoe from Rachel, and of course I'd lost 4 days of the summer. And so I did not put back in. I'll be very transparent with this. When we started this trip, I never thought of it about being a race or a source to see. It was to tell people about One4Water and to go from where we went to Hudson Bay, go the other direction. So, in other words, we skipped some days there on the river. We did not start at Keithsburg. We went down below Keokuk and started to make up for what we lost. Because I could do it then. We had transportation. If I got all the way down to Chapel Eye and Jim, my last partner, had to be home, I didn't want to have that issue where my last companion couldn't be with me and now I was on my own down in the storm. So it ended up, like I said, I got sick, no big deal, except we lost some days and we got back at it. And one thing about being that sick, and that might be about sick I've ever been in my life, once you feel better, boy, you really feel better. You know, you're ready to go. So, other questions, folks? Yes.
There was an earlier photo where you were pulling a canoe on a little wheel gadget.
Yeah,
across a wooden
that was
bridge.
at the Blanchard Dam in the upper Mississippi. That's where the Mississippi is. It flows, or it stops, and it forms Zebulon Pike Lake. So it's about a 7-mile lake. And that little cart was made by a friend of mine in Ames many, many years ago. Dave's been around it several times. And we're gonna use it on this portage. In fact, we used it on several portages and then left it at the Twin Cities when we didn't need it anymore. Well, an interesting story about that picture is as we're going along, there's that little tiny narrow wooden bridge that you saw in that picture. And my friend Don said, you know, look at this, now we're screwed. The cart's too wide for the bridge. We're gonna have to unload everything, take it across, take the canoe off the cart, take it across, put it all back together. He was kind of upset at how that was gonna happen. I said, Don, you know, what you don't know is they don't share an axle, each wheel's separate. I said, you roll one wheel down that little bridge and I'll stand in that tiny stream and hold the other one up and hold that side of the canoe. So we walked carefully along there and it worked perfect. Yeah, great question. Cool. That was my little canoe car. Jeannie.
How many fellow water travelers did you meet on the way down? And was there one area where there were more people using the waterways than others?
She wanted to know how many travelers you see on the river and how many, if there are more people than others. First of all, as far as travelers on the river, somebody was doing something from a long place to another place like that, we never saw any. Now, I do know through Facebook there were some other entities that were going down to Mississippi that summer, like a source to sea thing, but we never ran into them anywhere. Now, as far as other friendly traffic on the river, the upper Mississippi, especially like at Lake Pepin, around Red Wing, around Hastings, around, I can't remember, Lake City, whatever. When we'd go through places like that on the weekend, it was a mess. In fact, there's a big part of the book about that, about the pleasure boat traffic, the jet skis, the pontoons, the huge boats that people, they're friendly as heck, hi, and then their weight comes and just about crashes you, capsizes you. So there were some really tough days just due to pleasure boat traffic. But we never ran into other people doing a big trip. Whenever we would go someplace and we're getting out of the canoe to the portage and just try to get supplies, whatever, people would always be curious. You know, of course, we had the big sticker that says One4Water, unfortunate one on the canoe. They'd come around and say, hey, what are you guys doing? Well, at first I tried to tell them all, and then finally I had business cards written up that explained the whole thing. I said, here, this is how you can get on Facebook, this is what it's like and everything. And there were hundreds of dollars worth of donations came in just because curious people, then I'd hand them a card, and they'd say, oh, that's cool, and then that night they'd donate some money. So. Yes, sir.
Can you discuss the pollution?
Yeah,
Is there any? Or?
there's a lot of people that ask me about that, and since I'm not a scientist, I don't have any data to tell you. You know, I obviously can tell you that the water in the upper Mississippi was very clear. I can obviously tell you the water down lower is very dirty. But a lot of that sediment that's traveling with it, what I don't know is it unusual? Is it harmful? Or would it look the same way 200 years ago? I don't really know. I do know this, there's way too much trash. Now, on a better way to look at it, I don't know how old that trash is. It could be that the litter that we picked up, and we'd always pick up some around our tents and grab a few bottles and stuff out of the river, you know, just to make us feel better. It was there, but maybe it's not as current. Maybe the thought process is to not do that as badly. We camped one night at a place that, because there's a big storm coming, we had to just get off the river quick to the sandbar, which was flat there, and it was like a landfill. I mean, it was the dirtiest, trashiest place. It's just a place along the river. It's just that's where buoys, bottles, barrels, bags, everything with a B, that all washed up. And in fact, the song I put for that day was "Where Do the Children Play" by Cat Stevens. It's just a tragedy that there should be that much litter, but like I said, maybe it's older litter. It didn't happen last Tuesday. I don't know. I would like to talk about the going through the locks, because a lot of people would say, well, that'd be intimidating, a 17-foot canoe and you're coming up to this great big lock. Are you allowed to go through? Yes, you're allowed to go through, but on a priority basis, we are the low on the totem pole. If there's any bigger ships, any commercial traffic at all, we would have to wait our turn. Now there's 20-some locks on the upper Mississippi. There are none on the lower Mississippi. And most of the time, I think only about 5 or 6 times, we were able to just go right in, then boil the water, and we'd float away. And the times that we waited, we had to wait sometimes for as long as an hour and a half, or an hour and 45 minutes. So guys familiar at all with Tom Petty? Somebody says, good, you know, here's an interesting thing that happened. My daughter Robin, even though I'm not in the wilderness, I got cell service, I'm going past barges and bridges and stuff, but she thought it was important that she put a tracking app on my phone, so she knew where I was all the time. Excuse me. And of course, then she shared it with the rest of my family. So, as I'm going down the river, they always know where I'm at. Well, I pull into this lock someplace, I don't know where we're at, doesn't matter. And we're waiting now, because there's a barge coming through, and on the upper Mississippi, when they have more than, if the tow has more than 12 barges, then they take some upstream, go back and get warm. In other words, they take them apart, so it takes a while. So we're sitting there waiting for a while. And I get a ping on my phone from my son Andy, and he just says Tom Petty song. It's a puzzle. What are we supposed to come up with? And I'm sitting there talking to Don and I are trying to think about it. I said, oh my God, I'm so proud of myself. I said, he knows where to lock, because this tracking thing, it's free falling. Because the water's gonna go down. So I just go, free falling, gotcha. He goes back, the waiting's the hardest part. And we were at the lock, we also know we've been there for over an hour. So, but yeah, the locks were intimidating to start and weren't any problem at all. And the barges, they were intimidating and they were a problem. They were, usually not really dangerous, but they would create wakes that you had to stay away from. And obviously you have to stay away from the front of them. You can't get run over with one of those, that's the last breath you take, you know? And their wakes behind them are pretty big for a little canoe. So we would kind of watch what we're doing. And the one good thing about them, because the barge is coming at you now, like if we got squeezed over the corner and around the bend, so, and there's too many highways out here, so we couldn't get on the other side where we should be. And we're going along like this, as he's coming by, right here, there's huge, the froth and the waves are kicking way up, but it's not hitting us yet. As we go down and those wakes head towards shore, we're gonna run into them down here, like 300 yards. And by then, they've lowered out a little, and fortunately, like we could go, and I'd turn the canoe, so we'd go way up over one and then down on the other, and the trough would be wide enough that then we'd go up over the next one. We wouldn't be down here and have that one land on us. So, it was like, woo, like that. So it was kind of cool or whatever, but scary at times. One thing my son Andy said, and he's been in a canoe with me for a long time, many times, but never on that big of water as far as with the barges and that other stuff. And he said, Dad, he said, I was only with you for 3 days. And he says, I wasn't really getting comfortable with all that we were doing until about that time. And I thought about that. I had other people that went for a week, 2 weeks and whatever, and I'd been in the canoe all summer, so hippy skippy, here we go, I didn't think about it. But those other people, I'd always ask them, do you feel safe, do you feel comfortable? They'd say, for now, But I needed to realize that really it was gonna take them 2 or 3 days before they really felt comfortable.
You took all men, or were there any women?
They were all men. The only women I asked were my daughters,
Okay.
and unfortunately they couldn't go. I wish they would have.
So your daughter is tracking you, is anybody else out there keeping, do you have to get permission to be able to do a trip like this?
No.
So nobody else is keeping
No.
track of you?
No, obviously the Facebook posts, people would know then where I was, but no, except for the fact that my phone somehow connected to my family's phones. No, nobody else knew where we were at any given time, and no, we did not have to have any permission
Okay.
to go where we were. We didn't have to have any permission to camp where we camped, because those sandbars can be considered part of the river. It's not like somebody owns them.
Okay.
There were places, there's a wonderful area called the Upper Mississippi National Fish and Wildlife Refuge. It's like 450,000 acres or whatever, I don't remember the exact size, but it goes from like Hastings, Minnesota to Quad Cities. And in those areas, there'd actually be signs saying, you're in the refuge, you're allowed to camp no more than 14 days at a time. So, okay, overnight we're fine.
Hey, share a little bit about, what were they called, the River Angels, that?
Yeah, thank you. I wish I would. There's a group, before the trip started, I found out about a group on Facebook called the River Angels, and they are people that live up and down the Mississippi, mostly on the lower part. And they are very helpful. All you need to do is let them know that you're on a trip like this, that you're going a long way, because like every third day we needed ice and water. And every fifth day, we hoped to be off of the river to where we could shower and we could charge our phones and everything. Now, I try to float around in the river about every night just to cool off, but it wasn't getting me clean. So, you know, camping on a sandbar, camping on a sandbar, camping on a sandbar, pretty soon you need like a shower and you want to find some electricity. So we ran into this group called the River Angels, and somebody would say, yeah, if you meet us at, like, for instance, Hickman, Kentucky, I'll get you some ice, some water, and some other things, and then I'll let you know that when you get down to Melville, Louisiana, there's somebody else that'll help you there. When we were in Caruthersville, I didn't connect with any River Angels fairly soon down the river, and I'm trying to figure out where we could get some help in like 3 days. And I just, out of the blue, I called the Chamber of Commerce, and they were helpful not only in Caruthersville, but said, hey, there's a lady named Sally in Osceola, Arkansas, that said she'll just, here's her cell number, give her a call, and she'll help me get close to there. So Dave and I are heading for Osceola, Arkansas. It's raining on us one day, thinking this is a good place to go. Let's call this lady named Sally. Well, she's a freaking mayor. She runs the whole town. And her husband, Ralph, is a retired judge. So we had the hierarchy of Osceola, you know, coming and brought us cold watermelon, and then later that night brought us back some pizza. So yeah, we ran into marvelous, marvelous people that helped us along the journey. And we didn't run into any jerks. Didn't run into any goofballs. We ran into, well, I bet it was my fault.
It's always your fault.
We're floating along, a guy named Ryan's in front of me, and it's windy, it's headwind. Now when you have a headwind on current, that means the wind is coming this way, the current's going this way, so it immediately makes waves, makes big waves. Flippies, we call them. We're always trying to avoid the flippies, the swirlies, and the swimmies. Well anyway, there's too many flippies out here, so we're going along this shore. Well, this shore is full of barges that are parked out. They're not moving, but they're parked out, but their engines are running. And at any time, I'm afraid one of them's gonna just take a right and go. And I'm just, God, I'm so anxious. We're going along, and here's this one captain. Hey, get your, you know what, on the other side of the river. Can't you see we're working here? And it's like I said, we're trying. Sir, we're trying. Our canoe couldn't go out there, you know. And I know he couldn't hear me. He could stand right next to that diesel engine. But, so we'd gotten rained on, we'd gotten scolded, so we quit. We got to the other side finally, set up camp and went fishing. Said, screw it. I felt like a little kid that had been told to go sit in the corner, you know.
We hadn't heard of the River Angels. We had a friend of ours who is with the Sierra Club Bianco in Nebraska. His name is Graham Jordison. Canoed the Missouri River in 2021, I believe it was, wasn't it, Carrie and everybody?
Year or two ago, yeah.
And he stopped here in Sioux City, and
Good.
it was summer, so we were able to host him down by the river. But he talked about the river, so he did that whole canoe thing too.
Awesome.
And it was wonderful, and since he's with Bianco, he's also, so he would get off and talk to people on the way, but he was looking at coal plants and stuff. And I think I asked you on the phone at one point if you saw any coal plants.
Yeah, in fact, we talked about the one at, I think it's pronounced Genoa, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
We camped right across from it. It was a little ways downstream, this huge coal plant, not a sound coming from it. So I guarantee you it wasn't in operation anymore.
Yeah, so, but thank you. And but he mentioned the River Angels. He said that they were everywhere. They were always helping. And that's pretty special to have them.
Very special, yeah, especially when you need ice and water. And another thing I didn't realize till I started planning for this trip, once you get past like St. Louis, and you're heading for Memphis, and you're heading for Vicksburg and that area, that river, there's very few settlements. There's very few accesses to the river. It is really much more of a wild wilderness type area than it is up here. There's nobody living around. There's no towns, there's no cities, nobody's around. So you can go for miles, you can go for days and not have any place to have somebody access the river to resupply you. So you have to be pretty careful there and say, hey, I know this is only 2 days away, but there's 5 days between there and the next one, so we'd have to have them do that. You know, you talk about the coal-fired plants. Jim was with me. We were someplace, obviously south of Vicksburg, only like 2 days south of Vicksburg. We camped just downriver from a large nuclear plant that was still in operation. And, you know, you got the big towers and the plumes going off and stuff. And, you know, I'm not smart enough to know whether that's good, bad, or whatever. Maybe in the future it'll save us. But I wrote in there, I said, I took a picture of our little canoe and the willow trees and then that tower back there. Remind me of being in 4th grade, you know, where you open this page and it says down below, would you find something that doesn't belong? Yes.
Did you have to have permission when you went through those locks? You said you would radio ahead
To do that?
to get through there?
We didn't really need permission. We just needed to let them know we were there.
Oh,
And you can actually do this without the radio. Now, I talked to people ahead of time and they said, yeah, it's a lot nicer to have the radio and then you have it for safety and everything. But if you don't have the radio, you canoe up to the lock wall there and there is a cord you pull and there's a speaker and it's like ordering your Happy Meal. Hi. Hello. We're a canoe down here. Oh, I see you now. Can we go through? Just a minute. So you don't have to have the radio, but you get way in there then before you know what's going on.
right.
So it's better to know it ahead of time.
And do they sound better than the actual drive-thrus?
They do, and let me tell you this. The Army Corps of Engineers has done a lot of things to this country, to this river, and all this and that, and a lot of times a group like this could say, geez, did they screw things up, you know? But that's the whole entity, and that's decades ago. What I did is I had close interactions with employees of that outfit as you went down the river, and every one of them, they were as nice and helpful as you could ever imagine, including the fact that, like I said, a lot of times I'd like to go through the lock and then camp so that the next morning we could just take off. We didn't have to worry about barges waiting. So you go through there and there's signs saying this, that, you can't do, but it's a nice lawn over here, you know? And I'd say, hey, is there any chance we can camp there? No, you're not supposed to, go ahead. I'll bet I heard that 5 times. No, you're not supposed to, go ahead. And they were always very curious about what our trip was like. We ran into a big Corps of Engineers boat when we were getting back in the river at Helena, Arkansas, somewhere in there. And we ran into these people that were going up to check what they called their bug boxes. So they had put insect traps on some trees and they're going upstream to find out what they'd caught. I don't know exactly what they're looking for or whatever, but and they were so excited about the trip. They all had One4Water cards, and one of the gentlemen, Stephen George is his name, he hands us his card and he goes, I'm a paleontologist for them. I find, once the river's low, I find all kinds, I bet he found a bunch this year, he finds all kinds of artifacts stuff. And he goes, I live in Vicksburg. I can do anything you need if you get to Vicksburg. And Dave says, keep that one. Because of course we're going to be in Vicksburg in like a week and a half. He says, Hank, you might want to hang on to that one. So,
Is that good karma?
yeah, they were very helpful people. Yes, sir.
Are the locks 24-hour or?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, one of the parts of the book, see, I kayaked for a day and a half by myself, and then there was actually another day and a half that I was by myself again, maybe 2.5 days, I guess it was, because Andy had to leave me at Hannibal. It was getting close to the 4th of July, but I needed to get down to St. Louis, and it was only, like I said, about 2.5 more days, but now I was by myself in the canoe, and I was a little concerned about that because now I couldn't go as fast, I couldn't turn as quickly, but then I found out, wait, I can turn just quickly because I don't have the weight up front. So it was fine. I didn't have any headwinds, it was fine. But why I'm mentioning that is that I went through a lock as getting towards nighttime, and I said, hey, is there any chance I can camp there? And he says, you're not supposed to, go ahead. And so I set my tent up, honest to God, because the only place really, because right at that time, North St. Louis, the river was very, very high again. And so there's trees and there's water, there's no sandbars, but there's a little grassy spot right next to the lock wall with a big sign that says stay away, and there sits my tent. Now, I set it up right there, and of course the traffic's going through all night long. And in fact, at one time I heard, hey, There's a tent down there. You know? And I wrote in the book that I think those people, the next morning when I'm cooking breakfast, I got my eggs and bacon. Whoa! My eggs and bacon going there, and these guys are laughing and smiling, waving at me and talking. I wrote, you know, I think it wasn't because they could see that I was quite the chef. No, because it's just a couple eggs in bed. I'll bet they wanted to trade their big vessel and its responsibilities with my little vessel and its adventures for the next day or two. But yeah, we met some friendly people, and we could camp right by that. They go 24/7. Another thing, if anybody's seen any of the lights that those barges have on them, if they have lights on them that they don't always use, but if they want to, they could fry those eggs with them. I mean, you could be a half mile away and it just makes you look like you're an X-ray machine. And fortunately for us, only one night, because our canoe would be laying there along the river and our tents are up here, did we have a barge wonder if we were okay or what was going on and spot that thing on our tents and stuff like that? Because I mean, it is so bright, it's unbelievable. And which is really good. I don't know why, but maybe they never saw us, but we didn't have a problem with that. Yes? About done?
One more question.
Oh, yes.
How was the fishing? Did you do any fishing?
I should have done more. On the upper Mississippi, of course, every evening we try to fish. I don't know, maybe you saw some pictures. Don caught some smallmouth and stuff, and then Dave caught some catfish, Ryan caught some catfish. You don't see me holding a fish. Well, except the dogfish. One day it was going to rain, so I went out with a DNR guy by Bellevue and caught a nice bunch of fish. I didn't fish hardly at all towards the end of the trip for two reasons. One is I didn't have the licenses. I was trying to figure out how to go online and now I need a license for this state and that state and that state. And the first thing I did, I got a one-day one from Missouri because I'm just no good at technology. And then finally I thought, you know, I'm not going to worry about it as much as I love fishing. But the main reason was that once we got to where we were going, we decided this is where we're going to stop and that place looks good. You get the canoe up, you get everything out of the canoe, and you're already so tired, or I was. Part of the deal, it's no big deal, but I'm dealing with some therapies with this cancer, so I don't have the stamina or the strength or anything. So I really wanted to get the tent up and then just flop around in that water for a while. And then I'd be cooking supper, and I wanted to do the Facebook posts. That's the time, like Dave or somebody else would be fishing, and I'd be punching freaking buttons on my phone so I could send that stuff out. So I didn't fish as much as I should. Now my son Andy, like I said, he's only there for a few days. He fished more, and he even brought along what's called a cast net, so he could throw that out in the shallows and try to get some shad used for bait. And he just purchased it. Now I don't know, has anybody here ever used one of those? You don't just pick it up and it works. I mean, it was turning into like a taco and folding over, and he's getting nothing. I'll bet, honest to God, he spent a half hour of absolute frustration trying to make this thing go out like a circle and slowly go down the water and trap fish. And finally, he had a smile as big as the sun, said, I got some! He had 3 shad in that net. And he sticks it on a pole, sticks that in the sand, and sits there watching it. And within 10 minutes, he had a flathead on this big. It was amazing. It was so cool. And of course, it's way too big for us to eat, so we just let it go. So, but yeah, that was quite a thrill. So, all right. Hey, if we're done, I just want to thank you guys so much. As you can tell, I enjoyed talking about the trip. I'm really proud of the trip. I'm really proud of the book. And you know, like I said, no matter how old you do, give yourself a challenge. Give yourself something to look forward to. Give yourself something to plan for. I do it as I'm falling asleep. I don't like to fall asleep just going, what am I doing tomorrow or next week? I want to be able to say, hey, what if I do this? How will this work? Where did it go? And next thing you know, it's morning.
You've done some good thinking at that time. I'm good at that. That's when I think best too. So you're gonna,
I'll sit up
Hang
there
out
if
a little
anybody's
bit.
interested in looking at the books or buying a
Yeah.
book, and I can personalize the book for you. I've got hard copies for $30 and the paperbacks are $20.
yeah, and maybe they can look at your maps and that.
Yeah. Feel free to ask any more questions or go through the maps or the articles, whatever. The maps are kind of cool. And I apologize for not standing here walking around amongst you. I don't know why, but I have this deal where I could walk for 20 minutes to half an hour, and I can't stand for 5 without my
Well,
back.
you have a perfect voice for this, so it was just, don't you?
Now, if we had music going so that I was dancing, you know. then okay. Okay, I'm gonna go up front here.
Hey, before we break up,